In a deserted area, Margaret faces many challenges alone while her husband looks for work. Her daughters, Rose and Ollie, need her care, but tough weather and illness make life difficult. Margaret dreams of a better life, but as danger surrounds them, she fights to keep her family safe. Can they hold on and find hope in this desolate place? The movie's story began in 1933. Once, Oklahoma was a green place where many people settled. But suddenly, something terrible happened. The weather changed, and the green area became a desert. The rain stopped, and there were storms of sand and dust all the time. This made it very hard for the people living there. As time passed, many people left. Some died, and others were stuck there. They either had no other place to go or didn't have money. Every day it became harder to live in this area. One family that lived there was the Bellum family. They faced many problems, but leaving was not easy for them. In this family, there was a woman named Margaret. Her husband went to another state to find work. Margaret stayed in the area with her 2 daughters. She had 3 children, but one daughter died from a disease and was buried near their home. Because of the dust and bad weather, many children got sick. Margaret's youngest daughter, Ollie, became deaf from scarlet fever, while her older daughter, Rose, was still healthy. Their cow also suffered from hunger and weakness because there was no grass. During this tough time, they survived on the cow's milk. After her daughter's death, Margaret couldn't sleep. She suffered from insomnia, which made her health worse. She also had seizures, making Rose scared of her. Because of this, they did not sleep in the same room. The people living there wished for the land to become green again, so they could live in peace. But this seemed impossible. Margaret and her daughters missed their husband and father very much. They hoped he would return, or at least earn enough money for them to join him, but it seemed that he was having a hard time too. There was a sheriff, a doctor, and a church in the village. The women often gathered during the day to talk. Margaret had a sister named Esther who lived nearby. Esther had 3 children, and her husband had also gone away for work. Recently, Esther's son Thomas became very ill. One day, Margaret had a dream. In her dream, she first saw herself in a grassy field, but in a flash, the green grass disappeared and turned into a desert with a sandstorm. She heard many people screaming in the storm. This sudden noise woke her up from her sleep. Then, the movie showed how these people lived their lives. It was very hard for them, but despite everything, Margaret took care of her children and did her best to keep them alive. One night, Rose told her younger sister Ollie a scary story. This was not a good idea. The story was from a book called The Gray Man. In the tale, a man wanted to kill his children and wife and then burn their house. In the end, the man died in the fire, and now his ashes blew around with the sand. It was said that anyone who breathed in his ashes would become bad like him. Although it was just a story, little Ollie became very scared. Margaret also could not sleep. Ollie asked if their mother was under the control of the Gray Man. Rose explained to her that no. Their mother was sad because their sister had died. The next day, the family went to visit Esther. Her son Thomas had been coughing for a long time and was very sick. Esther looked unwell too, as if she had lost all hope. Her house was very dusty and she hadn't cleaned it. Esther told Margaret that she planned to leave because she had a bad dream. She wanted to take her things and leave in a few days. Margaret came to talk to her and tried to convince her not to go. She suggested that Esther should just seal the house and clean the dirt, saying her son would be fine. Besides, there was also a storm coming. But Esther did not agree and walked out into the storm. Here's a rewritten version of your text in simple past tense and very simple language, maintaining the original meaning without shortening it. Margaret returned home with her children, but they got stuck in a storm. For a while, they lost Ollie. When they got inside the house, they found that Ollie was already there. Using sign language, she said she was scared of a man. This surprised Margaret, so she went outside to check, but there was no one there. That night, Margaret learned that Rose often told Ollie the story of the Gray Man. Maybe Ollie believed the Gray Man was real, so Margaret scolded Rose for telling that story. Margaret kept the book about the Gray Man. The next morning, a worried Rose came to wake her up and said Ollie was right. There was someone outside with a gun. There was blood on the door handle when she went to look, but she did not see anyone. Later that day, Margaret found out that the carriage carrying Esther and her children had gotten caught in a storm the night before. When the villagers looked for it, they only found Esther and her son Thomas alive. 2 of Esther's children died in the accident. They brought Esther home. Margaret was angry at her because she had told Esther not to leave. Esther cried and felt it was her fault. After this terrible accident, Margaret was scared. She went to see the doctor, who told her to seal the house and make the children wear masks. Margaret did not have enough cloth to cover the cracks in the house, so she brought her bed to the children's room. Rose was a little nervous because her mother often got angry. The next day, Margaret saw a cow roaming free and she got very angry. She scolded Rose for letting the cow out. This cow was important because it kept them alive. Since there was no grass, the cow stopped giving milk. Margaret felt something strange in her heart, as if someone was there. She went upstairs with a gun. Earlier, Ollie said many times that a man was there, and she thought it was the gray man. Margaret became so scared that she began to believe the gray man was real. Then she found a man hiding, and she pointed her gun at him. He had been hiding there for 2 or 3 days. The man told her his name was Wallace and that he was a friend of Margaret's husband, Henry. He wore a jacket Henry had given him. He said he could not work because he hurt his leg. Margaret asked him why he did not come to the door. He said he did not want to scare them because he looked scary. He planned to leave once he felt better. Margaret did not trust Wallace. But then something happened to Rose. Her nose started to bleed. Wallace called himself a preacher and wanted to help. He touched Rose's face. It felt strange, but the bleeding stopped. For Margaret, it seemed like a miracle. She let Wallace stay in her house but told him not to be seen by anyone. Otherwise, people would talk about him. The next day, it rained. The children were very happy, and Margaret thought all of this happened because of Wallace. That day, outside the church, Margaret felt sad seeing Thomas, Esther's son, without clothes and in a bad state. Esther was not well mentally and could not care for her child, so the sheriff was called. At Margaret's request, they took Thomas to a safe place. Margaret felt sad about taking a child from a mother. Later that day, she felt very upset. Wallace, the preacher, was still in their house, so she went to him to talk about her feelings. She told him that she could not sleep after her daughter died and was having strange dreams. Wallace spoke kindly to her, but his secret did not stay hidden for long. Margaret received a letter from her husband. Wallace was there that night too, and Ollie was sitting on his lap. When she read the letter, she learned that Henry sent money, but Wallace had stolen the jacket. Margaret pointed a gun at him because he was a liar and a thief. He held Ollie to save himself. Margaret wanted to give him to the sheriff and asked for her husband's money. Wallace said he spent it all. He planned to let Ollie go but wanted the letter in return, but Margaret did not trust him. She pointed at her daughter and shot at the wall. Wallace let Ollie go but grabbed the letter. He burned it to destroy the evidence. Margaret wanted to kick him out of her house. Wallace told her he was an angel and that he healed her daughter. If she kicked him out, Rose would get sick again. But Margaret did not listen to him and threw him out of the house. The weather was bad and Wallace needed shelter. Margaret was scared and stayed awake all night. She had a nightmare about her sister Esther trying to kill Ollie. Since Margaret stopped sleeping, it affected her mind badly. She believed the gray man's story was true. One night, she saw the children's bed on fire. The children were fine. Rose realized her mother believed the gray man caused it and thought Wallace was also controlled by him. Rose asked, "That is not true, right? Mom, you said it yourself." But Margaret replied, "Did you not see how he cured you? And it rained when he came." Rose began to worry about her mother. The next day, Esther visited her sister and seemed better. She said she met the preacher who was guiding her. That evening, the villagers planned a celebration. Esther encouraged Margaret to bring her children. At night, when Rose wore new clothes, Margaret felt something was wrong with Rose. She thought Rose was not breathing and screamed for help. She quickly tied her clothes, but Rose was just laughing. Margaret's mind was tricking her into thinking Rose was screaming. This upset Rose because her mother was slowly losing her mind, and Margaret felt Wallace had cursed her, or that the gray man was doing this. She thought the gray man entered her body through dust. To prove she was not crazy, Margaret took her 2 daughters to the party. The sheriff danced with her, but Margaret acted normally. Esther also attended the party, and Margaret felt as if she had come with Wallace. Suddenly, Margaret felt something was wrong. Everyone gathered around her. Rose helped her mother by telling everyone that Wallace was a thief. Until that moment, the villagers believed Margaret. But when Margaret claimed the gray man entered their bodies through dust and made them do bad things, people thought Margaret had gone crazy like her sister. She left the house with her children but got scared again by a noise. She went outside with a gun. Sometimes she went outside, and sometimes she came back in. Then Rose realized that the strange things happening, like fires or objects breaking, were because of Margaret herself. She just did not remember and thought there was someone else, or that it was the gray man hunting them. When Margaret went outside again with a gun, Rose wanted to explain that everything was an illusion. But Margaret saw Wallace instead of her daughter. Earlier, Margaret had shot someone and even killed her daughter. But in the end, she woke up and realized what happened. At that moment, Margaret did not know. But Rose saw that she shot her own sister, and her body was lying there. Margaret told her daughter that the gray man entered her body because of the dust, so she needed to kill herself with pills. Rose was smart. She thought if she resisted, things might get worse, so she agreed with her mother. Then someone knocked on the door. It was the sheriff, who came to check if everything was okay. Seeing Margaret's condition, they wanted to take her children away. Hearing this, Margaret lost her temper and killed the sheriff with a knife. Later, she planned to put herself and her children to sleep forever. Rose wanted to stop her but lacked the courage. So she lied, saying Ollie went outside. At that moment, there was a strong storm. Rose tied a rope around herself so she would not get lost and went outside. Rose had to make a tough decision. She cut the rope, which caused her mother to get lost and die. Rose hid Ollie in the cupboard. At the end of the story, we see both sisters leaving the area on a train. They began to see greenery, but Rose would never escape the guilt of leaving her own mother in such a situation. The story ends there.